You were terminated this morning. Impossible. I'm in the board meeting. The lawyer stared at his screen, then froze. That's your signature on the equity agreement. The room fell silent. The CEO slammed the table, his face twitching. Sir, we need your eyes on this right now. I hadn't even finished my morning green tea, and already the junior legal associate was practically vibrating at my office door like a caffeinated chihuahua. I didn't roll my eyes, but God, I wanted to. Instead, I just took the printout from his hand and gave it a once-over. Top corner. Confidential memo. Center. Preliminary asset divestiture timeline. Bottom line. Someone had accidentally CC'd the entire M&A partner list, and if even one of them forwarded this to the wrong inbox, we'd be dealing with a press leak before lunch. Tell Johnson to recall the email, scrub the servers, internal and external, I said calmly. Then get me the full recipient list and pull audit logs on who opened it. I want to know if any of those files pinged a non-compete. I said it the way you tell someone how to make a decent grilled cheese, because that's what I did. Cleaned up disasters before they made it to the top floor. Michael Richardson, 48 years old, and for the past 12 years, I'd been their fixer. Senior strategic advisor. Technically, but mostly I played chess with a board full of jackals. 15 years in the Army teaches you a thing or two about preparation and situational awareness. I'd enlisted right out of high school in Colorado Springs, served in logistics and strategic planning across 3 deployments. When I transitioned to civilian life at 33, I brought those skills to MedTech Solutions here in Denver. The discipline, the attention to detail, the ability to see patterns others missed, all of it translated perfectly to corporate crisis management. I covered for their screw UPS, wrote the playbooks they never read, and made very, very bad problems go quietly away. In the military, we had a saying, proper preparation prevents poor performance. In corporate America, I learned it was more like, proper preparation prevents pink slips. This was a Tuesday. By 9:30 a.m., I'd already neutralized the leak, updated the kill switch protocol on external drives, and sent the internal comms team a revised routine testing email story to patch over the panic. Half the board hadn't even noticed. The other half was probably still figuring out how to unmute themselves on Zoom calls. The CFO called me a miracle in a suit, which is rich considering the man once tried to expense a hunting trip to Montana as a team-building retreat. He also once asked me if we could write off his wife's yoga classes as executive wellness consulting. Anyway, crisis handled. I returned to my office, set down my tea, and finally opened my calendar. That's when I noticed the first crack in the glass. My weekly one-on-one with CEO Harvey Walsh, blocked out for the last 624 Mondays, was gone. Not rescheduled, just deleted. No cancellation email, no note. And the invite for Thursday's pipeline alignment meeting had been updated. I wasn't on it. The system didn't say declined. My name had been stripped out entirely, like I'd never existed. That's when I checked my system access log. The back-end console, the DOC libraries, the review queues I was the admin for were still there. But something was off. My edit privileges had been silently downgraded on 3 key folders. Someone had pulled access while I was scrubbing their mess. I didn't panic. Not my style. But I did get still. Really still. Like when you hear movement in the brush during a night patrol and you don't know if it's wildlife or something that wants to put holes in you. Your training kicks in, your senses sharpen, and you start cataloging every detail that might matter later. In the Army, they teach you to read the battlefield. In corporate America, I'd learned to read the office politics. And right now, the signs were pointing toward an ambush. I've been in this game long enough to smell a setup 2 weeks before it hits payroll. And I don't mean one of those dramatic stunts with HR marching someone out under fluorescent lights while Janet from accounting films it for TikTok. I mean the real kind. The soft betrayal. The whispered restructuring. The kind of visionary pivo that starts with the CEO's granddaughter getting a corner office and ends with you finding your badge deactivated on a Monday morning. See, about 3 months ago, Harvey's granddaughter Sophia Walsh had joined the company. 28 years old, fresh Stanford MBA, and all the business acumen of a motivational poster. She'd been making noise about digital transformation and modernizing legacy processes, which is corporate speak for getting rid of the old guys. I'd seen this movie before. Young hotshot comes in, talks about innovation and disruption, starts cutting what they call dead weight. Problem is, they usually can't tell the difference between dead weight and the load-bearing beams holding up the whole structure. In the Army, we had another saying, prepare for every contingency. So if you're still listening at this point, I'll just say this. Most people hear stories like this and assume they'd see it coming. They don't. You don't. Hell, I almost didn't. And I wrote the contingency clauses myself. Because back then, I still thought I was just fixing their messes. I didn't realize I was the mess they were quietly planning to fix. I left the office early that day. Unusual for me. No one commented, but a few people looked up when I walked past. Those slow, polite blinks like they're waiting for someone else to say something first. The kind of looks you get when everyone knows something you don't, or when they think they know something they don't. My phone buzzed as I stepped into the elevator. It was a calendar removal alert. One of my recurring system monitors pinging that a permissions token had been revoked. The source, internal systems admin level. That's when I knew they were cleaning house. And I was the one with the mop until I wasn't. Still, I didn't react. I drove home, fed my dog Ranger, a German Shepherd I'd adopted from a military working dog program, poured a glass of bourbon, and opened the encrypted archive I hadn't touched since the merger 8 years ago. The one with the original buyout documents, the contingency plans, and the dusty old LLC agreements we'd shelved and forgotten. My home office looked like a combination between a corporate war room and a military command center. Maps of organizational charts on one wall, financial projections on another. Ranger settled into his usual spot by my desk, watching me with those alert brown eyes that missed nothing. He'd been trained to detect threats, and right now, his posture told me he sensed the tension radiating off me. I booted up the secure drive, entered my military service number, and navigated to a folder I'd hoped never to open. The label read, Emergency Protocols, Break Glass When Screwed. Inside were contingency plans I'd developed during my early years at MedTech, back when Harvey was paranoid about hostile takeovers and board coups. He'd asked me to draft hypothetical scenarios and defensive measures. What he didn't know was that I'd included provisions protecting myself too. In the Army, you never went into hostile territory without an escape route. I opened a file folder titled Trigger Events Clause 18.3b. IT stared back at me like a tripwire I'd set and forgotten, and I smiled. The next morning, I watched the first domino fall. Sophia had sent out an internal announcement. Subject line, Operational Vision Refresh Q3 and beyond. I wasn't CC'd, but I had monitoring systems Harvey didn't know about. Old military habit, always have multiple intelligence sources. The email was pure corporate theater. All the buzzwords, restructuring, flattening verticals, cross-collaboration, synergistic optimization. But buried in paragraph 3 was the kill shot. Effective immediately, all legacy strategy roles will be reviewed for alignment against updated KPIs. Transition plans will begin next week. Legacy strategy roles. That was me. Would have been me, anyway. Instead, I was now something else entirely. Something Sophia hadn't planned for. Something Harvey hadn't even realized was walking back toward them with 15 years of military training and 12 years of inside knowledge. I watched the email rack up comments, reactions, nervous DMs, the whole company buzzing like a kicked anthill. I stayed silent. Didn't text anyone, didn't log into Slack, didn't even check my voicemail. I wanted no trace of forward motion, no signals, just dead air. Because in the Army, they teach you about information warfare. In corporate America, I'd learned that silence before a strike is the loudest weapon you can carry. The storage unit SAT in one of those industrial complexes off I-25, the kind of place where people stash everything from failed business dreams to evidence of better times. Unit 47 had been my insurance policy for 8 years, though I'd hoped never to need it. The facility smelled like motor oil and broken promises. My unit was sandwiched between a failed restaurant supply business and someone's abandoned CrossFit equipment, kettlebells and dreams gathering equal amounts of dust. I keyed in the passcode, my old Army unit number from my first deployment, and the door groaned open like it was exhaling years of held breath. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Military precision in storage. Against the back wall SAT the filling cabinet I'd moved here myself during the second merger, when they digitized everything for efficiency and reduced physical storage footprint. What they'd really done was make it easier to delete inconvenient records. Behind a broken office chair and a crate labeled Q3 Crisis Playbooks, I found what I needed. A fireproof lockbox, combination only. No digital locks, no smart technology, nothing hackable. Just old school steel and mechanical precision. I spun the dial, left 18, right 3, left 21. Army coordinates from a mission in Afghanistan I'd never forget. The place where I'd learned that sometimes you have to be willing to sacrifice a pawn to protect the king. Sometimes you have to be willing to be the sacrifice yourself. The box clicked open. Inside were files I'd compiled under a single folder. Emergency protocols. Not in case of emergency. Not if something goes wrong. These were the break glass when they screw you papers. Plans within plans. Contingencies for contingencies. The documents felt heavier than they should have, weighted with years of foresight and preparation. I flipped through them slowly, remembering the paranoid mindset I'd been in when I'd created each one. Back then, Harvey was convinced the board would stage a coup. He'd asked me to think like the enemy, to anticipate every possible attack. What he hadn't anticipated was that someday, I might need protection from him. Clause 9. Contractual immunity during executive misconduct cleanups. Already expired. Clause 12. Reinstatement rights if fired during acquisition. Only valid if I still held shares. I didn't. Clause 15. Whistleblower protections with financial compensation. Too risky, too public. Then Clause 18.3b. I paused, holding the document up to the fluorescent light. The paper was heavier than the others, bond quality, with multiple signatures and official seals. Original copy. Initialed, signed, stamped, dated, March 15th, 8 years ago. The date took me back. March 15th. The Ides of March. The day Caesar got stabbed by his trusted friends. Harvey had joked about the date when we'd signed the final merger documents. Hopefully we're not signing our own death warrant, he'd laughed. I'd smiled and agreed, not mentioning that I'd specifically chosen that date. Sometimes the universe has a sense of irony about these things. The clause read, in the event of a retroactive involuntary termination initiated by an executive with familial ties to active leadership, the named employee shall assume full rights to equity redistribution per subsection 6a, provided the event meets authentication protocol outlined in Addendum B. I flipped to Addendum B, my finger tracing the lines I'd written in a different lifetime. Authentication required 3 things. Termination must be retroactive, the trigger must be a leadership change involving family, the clause must be manually activated by a timestamped, notarized copy of the original agreement. I sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit, file in my lap, hands steady as a sniper's. They'd handed me all 3 requirements on a silver platter, wrapped up with a bow and a pink slip. Retroactive, check. If Sophia followed standard corporate protocol, she'd backdate the paperwork to cover legal basis. Familial leadership, check. Harvey's granddaughter, promoted 3 months ago to Director of Strategic Innovation. A title that meant nothing and everything at the same time. Manual activation, that's why I always carried that specific pen. The one with pressure-sensitive INK tied to my authentication protocols. I pulled out my phone and made one call. Hello, Mr. Peterson? Yes, this is Michael Richardson. I need a notary. No, not digital. I need physical signature verification with full documentation. Yes, original document with witness protocols. I'll pay triple your rush fee for same-day service. He asked where to meet. I said, the Starbucks on 16th Street. 1 hour. I hung up, then took a breath that felt like the first real oxygen I'd had in weeks. This wasn't about revenge or ego or even justice. This was about what I'd built, what I'd prepared for, what 15 years of military service had taught me about being ready for the unthinkable. In the Army, we had a saying, hope for the best, plan for the worst. Today, the worst was about to become their problem. My lawyer, Carl Brennan, operated out of a brick office behind a sandwich shop and a vintage record store. He was the kind of attorney who wore boots to court, not because he was a cowboy, but because he'd been kicking corporate ass since the 90s and wanted everyone to remember it. I liked him because he never asked why, just how soon. When I'd first started working with him 8 years ago, he'd been the one to suggest the authentication protocols, the pressure-sensitive INK, the redundant verification systems. Michael, he'd said, in my experience, the people WHO screw you are always the ones who never think you're smart enough to screw them back. Need you to verify one signature, I told him, sliding the file across his scarred oak desk. I didn't sit. Dated March 15th, 8 years ago. Original INK, initialed per Section 18, witnessed per Addendum B. He flipped through the pages like he was reading a crime novel, raised one eyebrow at the equity percentages. This what I think it is? Nope, I lied smoothly. Just confirming a dormant agreement for audit prep. He nodded once and opened a drawer that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. Heavy-duty stamps, seals, verification equipment that probably cost more than most people's cars. You want timestamp logging? Yes. Multiple redundancies. 1 digital, 2 physical, full documentation trail. Anything else? I was never here. He smirked, the same expression he'd worn when he'd helped me draft the original clauses. You always say that. And yet here you are. Not in prison, I replied. Fair point. He stamped the documents with the kind of precision that comes from 30 years of practice. Michael, you know I don't give advice unless asked. But, I'm not asking. Good. Because if I were to give advice, it would be to make sure you're prepared for what comes after you pull this trigger. I took the file, warm from the verification process, and tucked it into my jacket. Carl, I've been preparing for what comes after since the day I got out of the Army. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Colorado sunshine that makes you believe everything is possible. I'd slept better than I had in weeks, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that comes from knowing your mission parameters are clear and your equipment is ready. At 8:45 a.m., my phone buzzed with a calendar invite. HR discussion, Room 7B, 9 a.m. No agenda, no context, just the digital equivalent of a blindfold and a cigarette. I showered, shaved, put on my best suit, navy blue, military press, the one I'd worn to my retirement ceremony. Ranger watched me from his bed by the window, head tilted like he knew something was different about today. "Stay alert, boy," I told him, scratching behind his ears. "When I come home, everything's going to be different." Sophia Walsh was waiting in the HR glass box like she owned the oxygen inside it. 28 years old, Stanford MBA, and Harvey's granddaughter. She'd inherited his jawline and his arrogance, but none of his street smarts. Buttoned up in a charcoal blazer that probably cost more than most people made in a month, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having been truly tested. Patricia Moore, HR director, SAT beside her like a nervous understudy. 45 years old, company lifer, the kind of person WHOD perfected the art of looking bussy while avoiding actual responsibility. Her fingers drummed against a copy of the employee handbook she'd probably never read cover to cover. I stepped in and closed the door with the gentle precision of someone who knew that every movement was being watched, catalogued, remembered. "Michael, thank you for joining us," Sophia started, her voice carrying that artificially smooth tone of someone who practiced this speech. "We'll make this brief." I didn't sit. In the military, they teach you about position dynamics, about how standing changes the power balance in a room. I looked at her with the same expression I'd used to evaluate equipment malfunction reports, professional interest in a problem that needed solving. She continued, probably following a script some consultant had written. "After a strategic review of our operational structure, we've decided your position has been dissolved, effective immediately." Patricia jumped in like she was reading from cue cards. "Actually, the paperwork was finalized yesterday. You'll find the details in this packet." There it was. Retroactive termination. Checkbox number 1, marked with a big red check. "You're terminating me," I said. Not a question, just facts being stated for the record. "Yes," Sophia said, a little too quickly. "As part of a broader digital transformation initiative. It's nothing personal." "Of course not," I replied, my voice carrying all the emotion of a weather report. Patricia slid a manila envelope across the table. "Your severance package is outlined here. We've already deactivated your badge and laptop access for security purposes. Facilities is packing your personal items, and we'd prefer to escort you out discreetly within the next 15 minutes. Like I was radioactive material that needed careful handling and proper disposal. Sophia cleared her throat, probably expecting tears or anger or some kind of dramatic breakdown. In her MBA CLs, they'd probably taught her about difficult conversations and managing emotional responses. What they hadn't taught her was how to read a man who'd spent 15 years in situations where emotional control meant the difference between completing the mission and coming home in a box. "I'll sign," I said, reaching into my jacket for the pen. The pen. The one with pressure-sensitive INK and authentication protocols she'd never heard of. Patricia blinked. "Oh, we have pens available. I'll use mine." I uncapped it slowly, like I was performing a ritual. Blue INK, perfect pressure, signing the acknowledgement page with the kind of care usually reserved for peace treaties or surrender documents. It was the pen that mattered. The one tied to verification systems, timestamp protocols, legal authentication frameworks that had been sitting dormant for 8 years, waiting for exactly this moment. Sophia watched me sign with the expression of someone who thought she was watching a defeated man accept his fate. What she was actually watching was the arming of a device she didn't know existed. I recapped the pen, slid it back into my pocket, and stood. The whole process had taken maybe 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds had just shifted the balance of power in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. "Thanks," I said, my voice carrying the same dry professionalism I'd used for 12 years of status reports. "Tell security not to bother escorting me. I know the way out." I picked up the envelope and walked toward the door, each step measured and deliberate. Behind me, I could feel their eyes tracking my movement, probably relieved that it had gone so smoothly. Outside the building, the Colorado sun felt different. Odder, more focused, like it was highlighting everything with unusual clarity. I got in my truck, shut the door, and stared at the envelope containing my severance package. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar app. Friday, 2:15 p.m. Conference Room 12, a board meeting. Q3 Strategic Review. According to the system, I was still invited. According to Sophia's termination paperwork, my employment had ended yesterday. According to Clause 18.3b, I now had legal standing to attend that meeting as something entirely different. Not as an employee, as an owner. I started the truck and headed home to prepare for the most important board meeting of my life. By Friday at 2:10 p.m., I was parked in my usual spot. Level 2, far back, next to the concrete pillar that had watched over my truck for 12 years. Same cracked windshield, same pine air freshener hanging from the mirror, Same coffee stain on the passenger seat from a crisis call 3 years ago. Everything looked the same, except I wasn't. I stepped out of the truck, boots clicking against concrete like a countdown timer. Not fast, not slow, just measured. Military bearing, shoulders square, tie straight. In my jacket pocket, the verified documents rested like ammunition in a chamber. In my other pocket, the pen that had just armed the most sophisticated legal eye in corporate history. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the anticipation, or maybe it was the weight of what I was carrying. When the doors opened, I could hear voices from conference room 12. The board meeting was already in session. I walked down the hallway lined with corporate achievement photos, Harvey shaking hands with politicians, Sophia accepting some meaningless innovation award, the whole company mythology displayed like a museum of ego. By the time this day was over, some of these photos would need updating. Conference room 12A was already filled when I opened the door. The board members flanked the long glass table like they were presiding over someone else's trial. Sophia stood near the projection screen, shuffling through her notes with the confidence of someone who thought she'd just eliminated her biggest obstacle. Harvey Walsh, SAT, at the head of the table, 65 years old and wearing the expression of a man who'd built an empire and was watching his granddaughter inherit it. Legal counsel huddled near the far end with his associate, both of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. I opened the door and stepped inside like I owned every square inch of marble flooring. Sophia froze mid-sentence. She saw me, blinked twice, then did something that would have been brilliant if it hadn't been so perfectly predictable. She smiled. "Michael," she said, voice climbing half an octave, "we weren't expecting you today." I smiled back, the kind of expression that doesn't reach the eyes. "That's interesting. I'm still on the board meeting invite. Conference room 12A, 2:15 p.m. Funny how these systems work." Her eyes twitched, but she kept up the performance. Of course. There must have been some confusion in the calendar updates. I walked past her, every step deliberate, and slid into my usual chair. Third seat from the left, directly across from the CFO. The room went quiet except for the soft hum of the projection system and the barely audible sound of several people realizing that something had just gone very wrong with their plan. "Well," Sophia said, clearing her throat, "we've got a comprehensive agent today, so let's dive right in." She clicked to her first slide. Q3 Digital Transformation Initiative, Legacy System Elimination. I checked my watch. 2:14 p.m. 1 minute until the email I'd scheduled would arrive in the legal counsel's inbox. 1 minute until the quietest explosion in corporate history. Sophia rambled through slides about streamlined processes and operational synergies, the kind of consultant speak that sounds impressive until someone asks for specific details. The board members nodded along like they understood what leveraging synergistic optimization matrices actually meant. 2:15 p.m. My watch vibrated once. Legal counsel's tablet chimed with that distinctive corporate email sound, polite, professional, and completely lethal. He glanced down casually, probably expecting another routine update. Then his face changed. The associate leaned in, read the preview line, and straightened like he'd just seen his own obituary. "Excuse me," counsel said, his voice cutting through Sophia's presentation like a blade through silk. Sophia paused mid-buzzword. "Is there a problem?" Counsel didn't answer immediately. He opened the email, tapped the attachment, and what happened next was beautiful in its simplicity. The PDF opened automatically on the conference room's main screen, replacing Sophia's presentation with something far more interesting. Header: Emergency Equity Redistribution Protocol, Clause 18.3b Subheader, activated. Involuntary termination trigger verified. The room went silent in that special way that happens when everyone realizes they're watching someone's world end in real time. The first page displayed my name, company ID, and employment history. Below that, the clause text in formal legal language that left no room for interpretation. In the event that Michael Richardson is subject to involuntary termination under circumstances involving executive familial restructuring, this clause activates automatically and irrevocably. Then came the signature page. 8 years old, properly notarized, bearing Harvey's own digital signature alongside mine. All authenticated, all legally binding, all completely ironclad. Sophia stared at the screen like it was showing her alien hieroglyphics. What is this? This can't be right. Harvey leaned forward, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror. "Turn that off. Right now." "I can't," counsel said quietly. "It's in the legal system now. Fully processed and logged." The next page loaded automatically. The archived memo from 8 years ago. Emergency Protocols 18.3b, Redemption Triggers. IT referenced the clause, outlined the activation conditions, and displayed Harvey's approval signature like evidence at a trial. "Jesus Christ," the CFO whispered, slumping back in his chair. Sophia looked at me with the expression of someone watching their carefully constructed reality collapse. You planned this. You set this whole thing up. I tilted my head slightly. No, Sophia. I prepared for this. You activated IT. There's a difference between planning an attack and building a defense system. But why? Why would you? You fired me, I said calmly. Yesterday, according to your paperwork. Retroactively, as part of a familial leadership restructure. I didn't write this clause after you did that. You just walked directly into it. Harvey's hand slammed against the table. This was never supposed to be active. It was theoretical contingency planning. Then you should have read what you signed, I replied, my voice carrying the same tone I'd used for 12 years of status reports. At 2:43 p.m., while legal counsel was still scrambling through verification protocols, the CFO's devices lit up like a Christmas tree. AFE's own, tablet, laptop, all chiming with alerts from the equity management system. He stared at his screen, watching numbers change in real time. Equity transfer in progress, he said, his voice flat with disbelief. Executive pool reallocation. 68% controlling interest. Transferring to... He looked up at me. To Michael Richardson. Timestamp 2:43 p.m. Status, irreversible. The board chair, a woman who'd said maybe 10 words in all the meetings I'd attended, slowly turned to face me. Michael, what are your intentions as majority stakeholder? I considered the question for a moment. Around the table, faces stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to fear to grudging respect. Sophia looked like she might actually be sick. "MAAM," I said finally, in military terms, you just asked me what I planned to do with the weapon you handed me. I paused. Right now, I'm still deciding whether to use it or just enjoy the fact that I have it. Harvey's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Michael, we can work something out. Negotiate. Find a solution. I stood up slowly, pulled my old company badge from my jacket, and placed it on the table in front of Sophia, the little plastic rectangle that had been my identity for 12 years. Thanks for firing me, I said. I couldn't have activated the clause myself. Needed you to pull the trigger for me. I walked to the door, turned back one last time. The conference screen still displayed the equity transfer confirmation. 68% controlling interest, M. Richardson, status, complete. In the Army, I said to the room, we had a saying, the quiet professional gets the last word. I smiled. Today, I got the last laugh too. Outside, the Colorado sun felt different on my face. Warmer, brighter, like it was welcoming me to a completely new world. I walked to my truck, parked outside the building I now controlled, and essayed behind the wheel for a moment. Ranger would be waiting at home, probably wondering why his human had been gone so long. Tomorrow, I'd have to figure out what to do with a medical device company and 449 employees who were about to learn that the guy they'd just fired was now their boss. But today I was just going to drive home, pour a bourbon, and enjoy the satisfaction of a plan that had worked exactly as designed. 15 years of military training, 12 years of corporate experience, and 8 years of patience had all led to this moment. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting even. And sometimes getting even means getting everything.